to the cement industry. Now, I would like to introduce my third speaker. We go on the other side of the world. We go in Latin America. I have to say that my experience also with FICEM was really appreciative. The first time from the very beginning of my mission, of our work, we found a very collaborative team. I mean, FICEM is a small team, but super efficient. And they are also working, we are working in a very intelligent way, focusing on both strengths that we have in both organizations. So I would like to welcome the chairman of FICEM, José Raúl González. Novo González, as we say. and José Raúl is also the CEO of Progreso, and he will tell us about the progress of FICEM. Thank you very much for being here. It's really a pleasure to have you. Thanks.
Thank you. What was the most interesting thing that you learned yesterday? I'll tell you what drew my attention. It was the poll that asked us, who will most drive demand for lower carbon? Your answers were the regulators, 51%, the architect, 22%, the public client, 19%, the private client, 6%, and the financiers, 2%. My interpretation of these answers is that you think that the financiers care more about the quality of the credit than the carbon footprint. That the client cares more about the cost than the carbon footprint. And the only people that care more about the carbon footprint than the cost are the government, the designers, and the architects and the regulators. As the great economist Thomas Sowell once said, when someone comes to you with an idea, you better have answers for these two questions. How much does it cost? And who's paying for it? But more about that in a moment. All right. I am here representing the Inter-American Federation of Cement. My organization gathers 85% of those countries of Latin America and the Caribbean, and about 70% of its cement production. We're 26 countries, 78 cement companies, 270 cement plants and grinding stations, 300 kilograms per capita of cement consumption, and 200 million tons of cement per year. We are a region of different cultures, different governments, different levels of development, and with different levels of complexity to coordinate our common solution to our climate challenges. Still, you could say that we are a very efficient region as far as CO2 total emissions is concerned, at least more efficient than the European Union. Let me explain. We are 660 million persons in Latin America, which is about 50% more than the European Union. And yet, we emit a quarter of the CO2 of our average European peer. Compared to the United States and Canada, our emissions of CO2 per capita are much lower as well. Of course, such efficiency has nothing to do with technology and everything to do with our level of development. Clearly, as we know, there is a high correlation, and I would say causation, between the emissions of CO2 per capita and the level of development of a country or a region. In Latin America, the average GDP per capita is about $16,000. In Europe, the average GDP per capita is 3 times more. And in the United States and Canada, it's 4 times more. In the so-called Global South, the cumulative number of tons of cement consumed per person is 10. In the so-called Global North, that number is 3 times higher. That explains the differences in quality of infrastructure and especially the differences in quality of life. Surely, that should also be a yardstick in the level of responsibility to address the climate change challenges. To put it in other words, if our solutions make our product less affordable, The people on your left-hand side of this picture will pay a disproportionately higher price for such transition. I cannot think of a more regressive way to address our climate challenges. If you think about it, this picture represents a technological challenge as well as an ethical one, as far as who will pay for the cost of the transition towards a low-carbon cement and concrete. So enough of this introduction. Let's get to work. This is our consolidated net zero path for Latin America. Fernando's comments yesterday about focusing on the traditional levers were right on point, because we believe that this is what we should be focusing on. We believe that these levers are not only feasible, but that they can be moved with leadership of our industry in a way that we can create at the same time economic value, social value, and environmental value. This is the integral challenge, the three of them at the same time. But first, we have to address our development challenge. And as you can see, the graph starts by increasing the emissions from 126 up almost 70% to 214, meaning that emissions will have to go up before they come down. Then we have to focus on the traditional levers. And as you can see, we were speaking before this lecture, we're all in the same thing, right? We have to move from bags to bulk in order to make less waste of a cement. We have to reduce the kilograms of cement by concrete. We have to lower our clinker content from 67% to 60%. We have to get some thermal efficiencies, reduce our fossil fuels, use more biomass, introduce stronger alternative fuels from 8 to 40%. And of course, CCUS is the biggest challenge, with 30% of expected reductions. Then we have to use green electricity. We have to account for the recarbonization of the concrete. And then two very interesting proposals, account for the methane avoided and the nature-based solutions, which we saw yesterday, that nature is the new green issue. Those are the levers that we have identified so far. And to improve our probability of success, we have partnered with these institutions to get the traction in order to meet the objectives. Because this is not only a responsibility of one industry, but a whole civil society. So there are industry associations like the American Concrete Institute that we have signed agreements with them, the University of Miami and their engineering department, our brothers from the Inter-American Federation of Concrete, which are the end users of this product, research institutes like the International Union of Laboratories and Experts in Construction Materials, Systems and Structures, the American Standards for Testing Material, because these materials have to be, new materials have to be certified, the multilateral institutions, International Finance Corporation, the Inter-American Development Bank of Latin America, and one very important partner, the Organization for Latin American Energy, because we will need this new green energy in order to achieve our objectives. The IPCC, of course, and the NGO, the Global Methane Hub, to help us measure how much can we mitigate in order other greenhouse gases to focus not only on CO2. Now we're thinking outside of the box. Some people think that methane is not such a big problem. We saw yesterday that it is a problem. This is what happens. If we can take the video, please, let me see. This is what happens when the dump near Guatemala City catches fire. It took 2 weeks to put it out. In the meantime, a cloud of toxic emissions forced the city to enter into an emergency state. I can only imagine the number of gases that were emitted and the toxins released during this incident. So this doesn't usually happen in the global north, but in the global south, it is a constant risk. As we saw yesterday, the cement kiln is the best environmental tool to prevent these kinds of disasters. And of course, we have to work with both local and national governments in order to put the right public policies in place to address the problem in a rational way. In other words, we need leadership, and the industry is providing it, and FICEM is right next to it to support it. I share the optimism that Fernando presented to us yesterday. Focusing on these levers can reach a significant proportion of our reduction in carbon emissions. It won't be easy, but if you ask me, how does the future look? They say that a picture is worth 1,000 words, and you're looking at it. This is the San Gabriel plant of Cementos Progreso, my company in Guatemala, which was commissioned in 2020. A cement plant with state-of-the-art technology that will continue to move those levers that we just shared with you in order to mitigate our emissions, but also a plant that will continue to produce the most important product for the adaptation to climate change. Without cement and concrete, and without them being affordable, millions of persons will not be able to have a decent home and a hope for the economic development that comes with resilient infrastructure. This is why we have to address our challenges intelligently. Otherwise, we would be passing the bill to the most vulnerable people, deepening their poverty and continuing to destroy our environment. Because industrialization is not the enemy of the environment. The worst enemy of the environment is poverty. And that is the alternative if we fail. Poverty that forces our people to cut trees to have the energy to cook their food. The poverty that makes them dispose the trash by burning it in the open air. These are the bigger causes of CO2 emissions in Latin America, not the industrial emissions. San Gabriel represents an operation that created jobs, saved its surrounding forest, and brought new opportunities to the local communities. That is our vision at FICEM, and I am sure that your operations have similar stories. So, let's be proud of what we have achieved. And let's transform our industry through a lower carbon footprint. But let's not forget the reason why we do it, for the improvement of the lives of our people. So let's work together towards this just transition. Thank you.
Thank you, José Raúl. Truly impressive.
Thank you.
Truly impressive. I like this tour of the world because we see really the context of everyone, on the reality of everyone. And I think the illustration of Guatemala is really something that put in perspective some of the discussion, particularly when we talk about new technologies and things like this. Now I would like to move to the other part of the world, which is India. We will change a little bit the format. We'll go into a panel.